After the catastrophe of the Space Shuttle Columbia, 3 astronauts ended up stranded on the International Space Station, with no forecast of a ride back home, with no immediate rescue. The station's crew was now facing a strategic and psychological crisis that no one at NASA could have predicted. They had a major problem. Imagine being more than 400 kilometers above Earth. A place where every drop of water, every gram of food, and every breath of oxygen is calculated precisely years in advance, had turned into a confinement with no end date. As they saw that the end of the journey seemed near, and the preparations for the return to Earth had already begun. But, in a moment of silence, the horizon changed in a cruel way. The Columbia tragedy sealed their path back, transforming what should have been a routine return into a kind of orbital exile, more than 400 kilometers above Earth, leaving the crew prisoners of an orbit that now had no defined end. With the shuttle fleet suspended for an indefinite period, the future of American space exploration plunged into an abyss of uncertainty. What had once been a routine of launches turned into a paralysis that would take years to overcome, under the real fear that the program, now under intense investigation and political pressure, would take a long time to return to space, if it ever did. Tomorrow was a complete uncertainty. And then you realize that you are inside a system that depends on total planning, but now has no exit plan. They depended on a ride that could no longer rescue them. On that Saturday, February 1st, 2003, aboard the International Space Station, which had been receiving crews for just over 2 years, were Commander Kenneth Bowersox, Flight Engineer Donald Pettit, and cosmonaut Nikolai Budarin, and the routine followed like any other day. They formed Expedition 6. Floating between modules, checking systems, and executing tasks rehearsed dozens of times before even leaving the planet. They were guardians of pure science, studying how the human body adapts to weightlessness and how fluids move without gravity. Everything seemed under control, nothing was improvised. They did not know that down below, the spacecraft scheduled to bring them home, the Space Shuttle Atlantis, had suddenly been deprived of its function. The STS-114 mission, in which Expedition 6 would switch places with the incoming crew to finally return to Earth, was now suspended indefinitely. The vehicle that represented their ticket home had become nothing more than a giant inert piece of metal confined to a platform in Florida while the world tried to understand the loss of Columbia. For down below, Columbia had ceased to be a spacecraft and had become a streak of light across Texas. 7 heroic lives were lost. Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, Laurel Clark, and Ilan Ramon had vanished amid the plasma of the atmosphere. The news reached the station silently, but the emotional impact was devastating. Expedition 6 was not just a technical team, they were friends of those who were gone. In a recorded video message, visibly shaken, the crew paid tribute to their colleagues. They declared,
"We had time to cry for our friends. That was important. Up here, we can't suppress our emotions, and we stay focused on the work."
Years of joint training had created bonds of friendship, but when the cameras aboard the station were turned off, a chilling realization set in. Bowersox, Pettit, and Budarin had become prisoners of orbit. Without an exit plan, the station's perfect system now had an invisible flaw. Time had ceased to be predictable. The crisis was not only logistical, it was biographical and physical. The human body did not evolve to live in a vacuum, and Expedition 6 was about to test the limits of human physiology. The mission, originally planned for 4 months, was stretching far longer than expected. Every additional moment the crew remained stranded on the station meant weaker bones and muscles to face the brutal impact awaiting them on return. As their bodies changed, the survival routine became rigorous and complicated. They needed to conserve resources and buy time. The station entered a state of strategic lethargy. Since the shuttles were the main cargo vehicles, the crew had to begin managing resources with military-like rigor. Water management became an obsession. They began air-drying towels in a controlled way so that the moisture could be captured by purification systems and recycled, reducing individual consumption from 3 to just 2 liters per day. In this scenario of scarcity, Donald Pettit used curiosity as a shield. He continued his experiments and used common objects to carry out tests that challenged classical physics. For him, science was the only way to maintain mental sanity in the face of a horizon where Earth seemed increasingly unreachable. With no defined exit plan, the three astronauts fought against atrophy in space and situations that would test the limits of their bodies. Meanwhile, NASA searched for alternatives to rescue its astronauts, and one possibility would have been Atlantis. Meanwhile, NASA evaluated alternatives, but no other shuttle could fly before the cause of the disaster was understood. With the fleet suspended and the program under intense investigation, the only realistic option came to depend on the Russian capsules. In addition, NASA faced pressure from the public and the government, as this was the second fatal accident and the entire program was at risk of being permanently canceled. They could not afford to lose more lives. Human survival in Earth orbit fell entirely onto Russia's shoulders. The Soyuz, a Russian capsule, was considered by many a rudimentary vehicle, a design from the 1960s, small, cramped, and basically a small capsule attached to a parachute. And to make an already difficult situation even worse, that version had an experimental navigation system that none of those astronauts had previously operated. Even so, they had no other option, and they knew it. It was impossible not to imagine the level of tension. They were about to enter a capsule they had never used before, in a critical situation, which made everything even more uncertain and distressing. Only 2 months later, on May 3, 2003, the moment to return arrived. They had remained in space far longer than expected. Soyuz was heading to rendezvous with them, but the danger was not over. After about 3 hours of seemingly normal descent, a serious anomaly occurred in the navigation and guidance system. Flames began to appear in the windows. Instead of a smooth and controlled descent, the spacecraft automatically entered ballistic mode. In this type of descent, there is no control. The only force acting is gravity. The capsule plunged toward Earth at about 27,000 kilometers per hour. To maintain stability and avoid disintegration, Soyuz began spinning violently on its axis, like a bullet fired from a cannon. Gravity, absent for 5 months, returned like a crushing hammer. Where they should have felt about 3 to 4 times the force of Earth's gravity, the astronauts were pressed against their seats by something between 8 and 10 times that same force. Under this extreme load, blood was pulled toward the lower part of the body, drastically reducing the flow to the brain. Vision began to fail, consciousness wavered, and breathing was no longer automatic. Every breath required real effort. To complete the scenario of isolation, the communication antenna was torn off during the violent descent. On the ground, rescue teams lost all signal. No one knew what was happening. Tension increased with no confirmation. Were the astronauts alive or not? Had they survived re-entry? There was an agonizing silence for hours. Because the ballistic trajectory is imprecise, the capsule landed 444 kilometers away from the expected point, in the steppes of Kazakhstan. The Russians initiated a massive rescue operation. For a moment, a real doubt hovered over everyone. When Russian helicopters finally located them, the confirmation came. Bowersox, Petit, and Budarin were alive, but alone in the desert, waiting for rescue in a vacuum of communication. NASA had finally managed to bring its astronauts back home. They became the first Americans to return to Earth in a Russian capsule out of extreme necessity. A solution that, from then on, became the standard for access to the space station for more than a decade. Years later, one of the astronauts would describe that experience as a feeling of a slow shipwreck, not at sea, but in orbit, more than 400 kilometers above Earth. The Columbia tragedy taught that safety depends on constant vigilance against the obvious that is ignored. If you want to understand where great stories really begin, do not look at major decisions. Look at the invisible details that almost no one notices. Like this video now. This helps the algorithm understand that you are looking for content that dives deep into the facts. And if you know someone who is fascinated by historical mysteries and major decisions, share this script with that person. Because, in the end, the world changes in the moments when a detail decides to be ignored. In the next video, we will investigate a new intriguing story, where another tiny and overlooked detail completely changed the course of events. To not miss this revelation, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. That way, you will be the first to know when the next mystery is revealed. Until the next invisible detail.